So coming up next is our next keynote, and that is Marco Slaviero. Did I get that right? Close enough. All right, so Marco is the CTO of Thinkst. And Thinkst has been a long-time sponsor of PyCon ZA. Thinkst is actually pretty freaking amazing. They do some fantastic work around security and hardware, like hardware devices that you can use on your network to monitor for intrusions. And it's like really, really clever how they do it. What's going on there? Disco. All right. So he's been talking at our conferences for a while as well. I'm always very, very impressed by what he has to say. And he is our next keynote speaker. So yes, please welcome Marco to the stage. You're welcome. This is for you.
Yeah. All right. Good morning, folks. Thanks, Sheena. Welcome to day 2 of PyCon Africa. I am the CTO at Thinkst Canary, and it has been great to see familiar faces, although there are a bunch of new faces, which is great. This is the premier gathering of Pythonistas rather, in Africa, and that's really the last you're going to hear from me about Python for quite a bit in this talk. While we do use Python extensively, we're very middle of the road Python users. We don't run the latest versions, we don't push the boundaries of the language, and we stick to tried and true libraries and patterns. If I'm going to summarize our Python middle of the roadness, you might see typing in our code, but you're not going to see any type statements in our code. Our principal engineer, Azza, does remind me though that we do use C types for high resolution clocks in one place. So while we do have some unusual code, most of our thinking goes into the product. And so what I want to talk to you today about is working on one product for a long time. Now, normally I'm going to feel uncomfortable talking about our own product so much in a keynote like this, but it is a backdrop to the lessons that we've learned. And so up front, I will say you're not our target market, right? We don't sell to developers, we sell to security teams. So in fact, none of this is a pitch. Please don't buy our product. In fact, you'll make me feel bad. So do use our open source though, I think it's pretty great. And I do have a lot to say, so I'm not going to be speaking slowly. I come out of the security industry. My background was offensive security testing, and at Thinkst we make security products that help defenders win. Harun, who's the founder of the company, and I were more active in security research, and we had publications spanning talks, papers, and book chapters. And we've really become a software engineering company by necessity, not by design. It really wasn't our intention to get so far into building products. And as much as we are a team of engineers, I'm really much more comfortable talking about security than development. I love attending PyCon, but I'm not sure I can say that much about Python development that you don't already know. However, we have spent a lot of time building a product, and I do have several things to say about working on the same product for a really long time. Recently at our annual company get-together, I showed this chart to our team. And what it does is it depicts the service histories for all the engineering members of Thinkst over the last 12 years. And there's a couple of interesting takeaways in this chart. I confess I'm low-key proud of it. There's 2 things here. The first is that 75% of all the engineers we've hired over the last 12 years still work for us. But more interestingly, we've been at it for 12 years, working on one product for 10. So we've been working on Canary for a decade now. The product is niche, but it is profitable and is really popular amongst experienced security teams. We've got thousands of enterprise customers, and they're spread out over all 7 continents. So you may have seen our banner at the coffee station. There's a canary with penguins in the background. That is not AI generated. We have canaries in Antarctica. And we have customers in the Fortune 500, Fortune 50, and the Fortune 5. So we like to think we punch above our weight. And in building Canary, we've really gained a perspective on long-term building that I think is worth sharing. So I do want to thank Sheena, Laura, and the rest of the PyCon team for graciously inviting me into the space to share this. These volunteers have done a fantastic job in making PyCon happen, and we should all be grateful to them. So in this invited talk, as part of the background, I'll cover some of our history, though I'll keep it brief. I'm going to touch on some of the factors that have led us to this current place, and then I want to spend most of the session talking about these lessons or reflecting on them, and actually where I've changed my views on some previously held opinions. First and foremost, every investment brochure you've ever looked at has words to the effect of, past performance is not necessarily a guide to future performance. right? And nothing I say here is advice. Please don't take it as such. And not because there's anything financial here, there's not. But I really believe speakers on stages like this hand out advice far too easily. Our circumstances are never going to match yours 100%. All right. So you may find parallels in some of the situations that we faced, but you may choose to go in different directions. I know we certainly did. And that raises an obvious question. If what I'm saying here isn't advice, well then, why am I saying it? In a nutshell, I want to celebrate long-term building, the idea of spending years crafting and working on one thing. The construction of the Great Wall of China spanned continuously 2,000 years, and the modern tech industry has really coalesced around a sort of an expected company trajectory that really focuses on the short term, with attention spans often driven by analysts and market fads. Blockchain, IoT, big data, these were all fads that we've seen over the last decade that really, when they appeared, you sort of had people throw these into products, but these days those sort of features don't really get much of a mention, and they're unused largely. So if you do plan to build a product company at some point, or you want to build the sort of company that you want to work at, well, maybe there's some lessons here that might resonate with you. Aiming for long-term building is an alternative. It's not common, it's not easier, and it has a different reward structure, but it's been great for us. And to be sure, this talk is not a victory lap. While we're happy with where we're at, there's no victory to be declared in long-term products. There's only fate to be tempted. So I'm going to leave predictions to the astrologers. Tomorrow the markets could shift, or we could be breached, for example, or there could be political earthquakes that open up, sort of deep chasms between us and our large foreign markets. So we can't rest on our current position. We have to continue resisting the natural resting state of companies, which is dead. Short-term building gets enough positive press with every major exit of a company that's only been around for a few years. So we're going to talk about long-term building here. And I'll paint a super quick picture of what we've done. We've always been a security-focused company. Harun founded the company in 2010. I joined him a couple of years later in 2012, and we were doing security consulting work. We then built a phishing simulation service called Fish5 in 2013, and we sold that in 2019. But really, our main star is Canary. We started this in 2015, or we released it then, and it's a hardware device. Some of you may have seen it outside. In essence, it's a honeypot. A honeypot's a fake server. You put them in your network. They look enticing to attackers. When they try and hack it, you get an alert. So it's a burglar alarm for your network, and it's a simple idea. It's an old idea. But the commercial options at the time were terrible. And when Harun suggested we build a honeypot, I really didn't see the point because there were already commercial options available. But I didn't realize how bad they were. So I humored him, and it turns out the joke was on me as Canary took off. So since then, we've extended it quite significantly, and your canaries can basically emulate a whole bunch of profiles at this point. So our business model is we're B2B SaaS. Right? It's subscription-based. Customers give us hard-earned cash, and in return, we give them a management dashboard. We keep their devices updated, and we keep extending the service. And to persist to this point, we've been assisted by good fortune, no doubt, in addition to several direct factors. I'm going to glide through some of these quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time here. The first factor for us was that we knew security when we got into building this product, right? So we knew some of this terrain, but we didn't know how to build product. And so we only had to really learn one thing here, which was product building. We didn't also have to learn about security. I see lots of founders who go into a space where they know nothing about the space and nothing about product building, and now you're trying to learn two things simultaneously. That's pretty tough. The second factor for us is that we remained unfunded. We're self-funded. We've never taken outside money. And that factor was less by design initially and more a factor of we didn't need it. So the initial development for us was funded through that security consulting work, the Fish5 revenue, and a small information product that we published. And that meant we could find our feet in building the product without feeling rushed by the need to satisfy outside investors. Now, it's not to say money was freely available, but salaries were paid and we could afford our infrastructure. There is more to say here, but Harun has said quite a lot on it. The third factor for us is that we saw value in spending time fiddling with new tech and in experimenting. And it gave us the experience and exposure to tools and ideas we weren't familiar with. And that habit is strongly present in the security community, and it served us well in building product. For example, we are not hardware people, but an early Arduino course that Azza and I took gave us the confidence to actually say, well, I think we can ship hardware here. In thinking about this next factor, I'll say that while the world mostly rewards excellence, it's hard to persuade an individual person to be excellent. They tend to want it or they don't. And it's a bit of a cliche, but in our experience, it's been accurate. And a strong factor in our persistence was excellent people. Also a bit of a cliche, but true. And they're willing, and in having excellent people, one factor is them being willing to critique and strive for improvement. And that's not everyone's cup of tea. You know, especially if you're building a UI, this is the third version of the UI, you're still not happy with this UI. Are you just going to ship it because we're now sick of it, or do you go on and say, we're actually going to build another version, the fourth version of this UI, because we want it to be excellent? So fighting these hounds of mediocrity has been a big factor in our persistence so far. Incidentally, that picture is the only AI content you're going to see or hear from me today. I asked ChatGPT to make wolves more and more mediocre, and they look a bit like dogs to me. So apparently that's what a mediocre wolf is. The last factor looks trite because nobody says ignore your customer. But usually this gets lip service, not actual focus. And so we try and prioritize customer experience in all interactions. And that stems from a very simple thesis. If customers don't return, well, the company eventually dies. Right? Pretty basic. And they're going to return because of a product that makes their lives simpler or easier or better in some way. It might be features, it might be the support, but you have to do something there. So if you're not solving their problem, then you have a problem. Over time, things that were important to us then got distilled basically into these 4 values. Firstly, we delight our customers. The goal is to delight them, not to satisfy them. And that's true for everyone, not just the software engineers, but it's true for support, customer success, shipping, back office. All of them aim to delight our customers in their interactions. Secondly, we are a learning organization. We exist to get collectively smarter, we play, and we experiment. Third, we want to be a refuge from mediocrity. Collectively, the company aims to get better and smarter in all the things that we do. And we don't always hit that mark, for sure. But we don't fool ourselves when we miss it. We own it. And lastly, we do well by doing good. With resources, we can extend our impact beyond our product and into the wider ecosystem, both online and in the world around us. And so these 4 values are a distillation of the company that we strive to be. They're guided by the recognition that we're not here for the short term, but we want to engage meaningfully with our work over a prolonged period. Now, there's parallels between this and Simon Sinek's take on infinite and finite games. The notion of infinite games, to quote Sinek, is one where, quote, the players come and go, the rules are changeable, and there's no defined endpoint, end quote. He lists examples like business or politics or life itself, and none of these have fixed rules or fixed endpoints. Many founders start building with one eye already on the exit. They've already entered themselves into a finite game, and that means they're setting themselves up for a typical startup journey. In the idealized startup, you kind of begin with an idea, right? You add a co-founder or 2 to find strength where you're weak. With your own funding, maybe you build an MVP, maybe you raise a seed round from angel investors, and you use that to build a small team. And hopefully you get early traction. And if all of that goes well, in your Series A, you're finding product market fit. You're trying to figure out your revenue model. From then on, it's further growth rounds, right? To get sales right, to scale your operations, and maybe even to go international. Now, at any of those points, if you don't manage to impress the next group of investors, well, then your company eventually will die. So you're aiming at a positive liquidity event, something like an IPO, a merger, an acquisition, but most don't get there. They face liquidation. This isn't news to many of you. You've either experienced it firsthand, or you've read the playbooks, or you've read the news. The thing is, once you get on that funding merry-go-round, the exits are locked in. No startup investor wants their money locked up for decades. They're looking for returns in 3 to 5 years. Right? And so as shareholders, they'll have a lot to say both about what goes into the product and how the company is run. They paid for it, it's their right. However, we've seen a bunch of examples from friends in the security industry who took funding, and now they spend their time not building product, but doing roadshows, trying to focus on their next funding round, and they're not thinking about what goes into their product. In their thinking, whatever features go into the product must actually satisfy the investors. Investors need to be kept happy above all else. Now, you would expect that investors want what customers want, but their interests are not always perfectly aligned. And to be clear, investors want a company that they can sell, right? That's what they want. They want a company they can sell. They're not looking for a product. They want a company they can sell. Customers want a useful product. And so investors are more likely to pressure builders into throwing the latest fad into a product than customers are. Let's consider MCPs, the gateway to the promised land of agentic AI everything. Currently, security product teams anyway around the world are falling over themselves to launch MCP integrations, and it's generating lots of press. There's pressure from analysts and investors. But customer reactions are much more mixed. We've seen and heard product teams adding MCP support. They breathlessly announce it, and then they act surprised when it turns out that there's very low uptake for this new MCP integration. Customers are only rarely waiting for you for your next feature release. They want your product to keep working, and for sure, and they want you to fix the issues that they know about. So in staying out of the funded startup world, we've been able to build long-term over 10 years. But wait, I'm sure you're thinking to yourself right now, Google's been around since like 1998. Amazon's been around since 1994. 10 years is nothing compared to those timelines. So how do you, Mark, get to opine about long-term building? And it is, I think it's a reasonable question. I think there is a difference though, in my view, and that is that our single team has been wholly focused on this one product for the last 10 years. There is no other product to jump to. Products at large companies are proving grounds to move up in their hierarchies. Very few people hang around long-term on products in those companies. They cycle in for a few years and then they move on to other parts of the company. At Google, these products famously stand a good chance of getting killed. Amazon does tend to keep their products going, though not always. And I'm not talking about long-term companies like Google, Microsoft, or Amazon. They clearly have us beat. But I am talking about working on a single product for that time period, trying to delight customers along the way. And I think it's not super common to hear this perspective. So through this journey, we've learned several lessons about what it takes to build a long-term product. And these are the major ones that I think matter. The first lesson is that customer focus is paramount. In early stage companies, you can simply buy customers, right? Customer acquisition cost, that the CAC metric is one you might be quite familiar with, but that's how much you spend to gain a single customer. And you can spend it on marketing and sales, or in some cases, people simply pay people directly to use their product. But for long-term products, customers will churn if they're not happy with the product. You can't pay them to stay on the product. And that's where lifetime value, or LTV, is used as a metric. And really, for me, this is quite a key thing. Customers don't really care about your flashy new UI, your convoluted permissions model, or the refactored code that increases corner case performance. They especially, and I cannot stress this enough, do not care about your state machines, your timelines, and your fanciness in the APIs. They care that you solve their problem. We don't track CAC or LTV, but we do track churn. Delighted customers don't churn. Well, not because of reasons under our control. Maybe they go belly up. We can't help that. But I will point out, if a customer does go belly up, in fact, you don't delight a company, you delight people. And when those people move on to their next company, they might take you with them. And I think at this point, our record at this point is somebody's taken us to 7 companies as they keep moving. Now, I don't know what that means about, that person seems a little like the angel of death as they go to companies. Not all of them died, to be fair. But yeah, they've taken us to 7 companies. And so we aim to delight rather than worry about CAC or LTV. And there's sort of a description, I think broadly people would talk about that now as product-led growth, something like that. Now, closely tied to delighting customers for us is review. And this grew from our engineering culture, and it's spread to all aspects of Thinkst. Like many in our audience here today, we require code reviews before code is merged. Well, we use Fabricator, so it's landed, but kind of same difference. And I don't need to sell you on the benefits of code review. But what it did foster for us is the idea that review and double checking is intrinsically a good thing. In bootstrapping our support and customer success functions, we've had situations where mails went out with misspelled customer names or incorrect product descriptions. On the sales side, we've had salespeople on calls where they sort of get some of the thinking about the product wrong. And looking at how review worked so well for us in engineering, we had started leaning more and more on it throughout the company. And so at this point, support and CS mails get reviewed regularly. It's part of how they go out. For a sensitive thread where we're dealing with something with a customer, it's likely to get 5 sets of eyeballs or more before a mail goes out. We record our Zoom calls with the sales calls rather are on Zoom. We record them with consent, of course. And then the sales team will regularly review those Zoom calls as a team to find out or identify ways that they can improve on those. And the thing is, not everybody who joins us likes this or gets us. That's kind of the reality for it. Not everybody wants somebody else double checking their work. And so we have seen some new folks struggle with this. But we are pretty unashamed with it at this point. We think it's a great thing, and this is one of our practices. And for what it's worth, this presentation has got seen by a bunch of eyeballs inside as well. Everything gets reviewed. And so in building long-term, our third lesson here is we've learned to hire slowly. And that runs counter to kind of funded company tactics, where growing a team is imperative, right? And so hiring slowly doesn't mean we have lots of people who are looking for projects. So it means we have to be quite judicious in the work that we select and in the problems that we tackle. We use OfferZen. Who else uses OfferZen? Other folks? A handful. So we like OfferZen. We think they're pretty great. And a little while back, in speaking to them, they asked me what our expected hiring numbers were for the upcoming year. And I said, we have no planned number, right? I expect to do a lot of interviews, and when we see great people, well, then we'll make an offer to them. And that took the OfferZen folks a little by surprise, because they're used to dealing with bigger companies who have hiring targets. We don't set hiring targets in terms of numbers. In fact, I guess Goodhart, he warns us against this, so you're probably familiar with this statement. But if we aim to hire 5 people in a quarter, we'd be trying to fill the roles regardless of that candidate, of the candidate quality. And so instead, we aim to hire people who are better than us in tangible ways. And it took kind of several years for us to get the technical hiring process right. It hinges directly on writing code that's relevant to the work that we do every day. And it has been successful for us in yielding a great team. And as I said, it filters heavily on their ability to do the kind of work that we do every day. But on the other hand, in a place we have struggled is in hiring sales and support folks, because on the technical or on the engineering side, we can give people a coding challenge effectively that's very close to what we do, and then we evaluate them on that. For sales and for support, we don't really have a single piece of work that we can evaluate them on. And so it's a lot more mushy. We're trying to have an interaction with them, evaluate technical knowledge, and judge their interaction and interest, and that is a lot more fluffy. So, we obviously also are looking for engineers who can work on or want to work on a single product, and that's not universal. There are folks who love agency work or contracting work or consulting work. That can be just as fulfilling, but there are a cohort of folks who want to be single-focused, and those are our people. And we do make this clear in our pre-hiring calls, where we also talk about our values. Hiring or firing changes the team culture with the entrance or exit of every team member, and it doesn't matter their experience level. And that's especially true in smaller teams like ours. Well, I mean, I'm talking about my experience, which is smaller teams. And it does seem a bit trite, but it is a lesson hard learned. If the new person is not suited to the team, well, then regardless of their skills, their impact will be felt quickly and in the wrong direction. In short-term companies or large-term companies with many teams, other options exist if there's a mismatch, right? In the short term, you can just grind through the pain. In the long term, if in larger companies, that person can move to a different team. But for long-term small organizations like ours, team culture is vital, and we have to protect it. You also have to, in that line, think and plan for career paths, because people don't want to do the same work for 10 years. You have to give them growth. In large companies, the typical path is into management, whereas for smaller companies, they simply don't have those opportunities for management. But there are still opportunities for technical leadership. And one approach is to offer, of course, the parallel track in which folks can stay technical and still see the same salary growth and prominence increase as if they had gone into management. And so as fundamentally an engineering company, for us, technical leadership is highly valued, and our best engineers don't have to leave technical work to advance in their careers. But at the other end of the career path, there are folks who are just starting out. And you may also have seen these sorts of articles about companies slowing or stopping the hiring of juniors due to the adoption of AI coding agents. I think it's insane for several reasons. But without going into a full rant here, I think it's incredibly short-sighted. We do not exist in a vacuum. If you want to deprive yourself of seasoned developers 5 years from now, well, I think the best thing to do is to stop hiring juniors today, right? There's a pipeline. It takes a junior to become a senior. And so startups, though, are not thinking in a 5-year timeline, which I understand. But unfortunately, even bigger companies who should be thinking in those timelines often are actually just thinking about the next quarterly results call. And that is a real tragedy of the commons. I said I'm not going to give any advice, and I won't, but I will plead with you to keep hiring juniors. You've got to nurture them, coach them, and help them grow into better engineers. I think we can all do better in this regard. I'm happy to chat more about nurturing young engineers after the talk. There have also been Python-specific lessons over the last decade. And in selecting Python as our lingua franca more than 10 years ago, we've seen the language evolve. Mostly, it's honestly been more idle curiosity as we've concentrated on building our product. And so there are a few notable exceptions that I could point to, or rather notable additions I could point to, that made us excited, echoing my statement up front about us being very middle-of-the-road users. Data classes in Python 3.7, they were quite useful to us. The addition of built-in enums, pathlib extensions, f-strings, and match case statements, they were nice. You might find some walrus operators in obscure corners. And obviously with Python 3, async IO was a big draw card. For us, we use Twisted, which is the OG async IO framework in Python. We are a big Twisted shop. We build heavily on Twisted, so we don't actually use that much async IO. The typing module gets added, frankly, under what feels a little like peer pressure, but it is there. And we've moved away from Bash to Python for any moderately complex CLI script. But I think on the ecosystem side, that's where more of our interest has been attracted to. Changes to UV, obviously we use UV in a bunch of places. PySpy has been really nice for us in terms of performance optimization work, and the Python LSPs in VS Code have just made browsing repos nicer. So we're happy to have picked Python for the reasons that won't surprise you: rapid development, diverse package ecosystem, and flexibility to make things work. In addition, the memory safety aspect of Python has been a big plus for us. We're a security product. Memory safety is important. Now, some folks might raise performance as a drawback to Python, but honeypots, which is what we make, have the very fortunate property that they don't need to be performant. Right? A honeypot just needs to get out the way that we build them. They just need to get out one alert. So you can throw 10 gigabits of traffic at our honeypot, but if it sends out one alert, we've done our job. We don't need to try and absorb 10 gigabits of traffic. It's fine if it falls over after that. So Python's performance has satisfied us for 10 years, even running on small appliances or as web backends. I feel I have to point this out because the joke didn't fully carry. I know the logo is stretched. It's longitudinal. Yes, I know, it's a weak joke. Moving on from Python lessons, we've developed an understanding of competition, which honestly, I don't think is actually that widely replicable by others. You know, we're a niche product. Globally, there's less than 15 recognized honeypot vendors. And really, there's like 5 you need to actually think about. So it's very easy to differentiate ourselves from our competitors and forge our own path. In the last decade, we've seen new companies form, make a noise, then go bust or get bought out. And we've been around to witness several rounds of consolidation in this space. And almost all of these entrants have followed the funded company game plan. From the early days, we ignored competitors and just focused on building because we knew the direction we wanted to take the honeypot in. Recall I said earlier, a factor in our persistence was knowing the terrain. That meant that we didn't actually look at competitors to get an idea of where we wanted to go. We took it in the place we wanted it to go. So it has stood us in good stead. Now, that typical B2B SaaS-funded company playbook does focus on large deals, and that gets into enterprise sales. It means pleasing analysts, it means chasing irrelevant features and long sales cycles. Each deal becomes very important, so much so that you're willing to build features solely for one customer, or, if you are unfortunate, maintain customer-specific branches. And if you've been down that path ever, you know the pain that exists in holding on to customer-specific branches. On the other hand, with product-led growth, it meant we could concentrate on building Canary and landing small deals quickly, often after a single 30-minute Zoom demo. Those small customers renew easily each year, and they tend to grow their license count each year. And so that's really perfect for our long-term thinking. No one customer out of our thousands we have dominates our balance sheet, and everyone gets the same code. There's no customer-specific branch for us. The sixth lesson for us is that from early on, we were pretty clear we didn't want to limit our target market. And again, we were fortunate in the sense that in South Africa, locally, there was not much of a market for honeypots. So from the get-go, we had to sell internationally. And that meant we had to position ourselves as a global vendor. But there is a perception to be managed there. We don't make being South African our core identity. We don't hide it, but we see it as incidental to our ability to deliver to our customers wherever they are in the world. Selling internationally has taught us a bunch of lessons about international logistics, payment, and tax that we previously had no knowledge of and had to learn along the way. Eventually, you figure out that to export stuff regularly, DHL need these export code number, whatever, you become registered as an exporter. But you only figure this out when DHL refuses your exports at some point because they say, well, you're just sending too much stuff, like we're not doing this anymore, and you now need to figure out actually what is the process for that thing to happen. And so there were a whole bunch of those lessons along the way as you kind of step into a space where you don't know and you figure it out and you work it out. The seventh lesson here is on perception. And if there are any downsides to our approach of remaining unfunded, then the one lesson is that the public perception of unfunded companies has largely been shaped by VCs who tell builders that they should be chasing unicorn status, which is for the benefit of the VCs, not so much for the builders. It's in their interest to push more companies through funding, so they will be dismissive of remaining unfunded. And that translates into the general public having similar views. Just to kind of demonstrate this, a couple of months ago, I was at Stellenbosch University. It's one of our universities near Cape Town. And they had a computer science department careers day, and I was at the careers day. I was chatting to a student, and the student asked me what our headcount what our headcount is, how big we are. And I gave him the number, and he said, "Oh, so you don't plan to IPO, or you're not IPO'd, you haven't IPO'd yet?" And I said, "No, we haven't IPO'd, and we have no plans to IPO." And he sort of looked at me and he went, "Oh, so you're a passion project?" And I was like, "No." But we've also been called a lifestyle company by a particularly ignorant industry analyst. And the reality is that in this space, we have more customers and a larger distribution than any of the other honeypot vendors worldwide who are funded. We're also profitable, unlike them. But in the metric that matters is often these weird metrics like headcount, which makes to us no sense. So in deliberately not following the expected paths, you open yourselves up to these comparisons that to us don't make sense. We rely on product-led growth. We have minimal spend on marketing and sales. And for us, the customers gained this way are loyal, and they are our sales team when they spread the word. That idea of accepting slower but loyal growth is slightly counterintuitive. And in the last decade, not only have we learned lessons, but I've also reversed my stance on several pre-existing ideas that I had. Among software developers, legacy code is effectively a four-letter word, right? What you think is these idiots back then, as you're trying to refactor some code, didn't know what they were doing, and now I have to support this rubbish. If they only knew what they were doing then and wrote it better, I would not be doing this refactoring work today. Morons. And certainly, I've had that view. But for me, it's become more nuanced, as some of our original code now does qualify as legacy code. And maybe it's because a good chunk of it is my code. So, All new products start with a clean slate, but they also start where the state of knowledge was at the time. And when we started Canary, Python 2 or Python 3 were our options. We had to pick between the two of these, right? It's in 2014. And Python 2's end of life was far in the future, like 2020. The Python 3 libraries were nowhere near the same quality as Python 2 in 2014. And so we had to make a decision. Are we going to go Python 2 or are we going to go Python 3? If we go Python 3, we have all this future support. Well, that's the direction of the language. But we're going to be writing a whole bunch of library code up front or working with broken libraries. If we go with Python 2, we have a rock-solid base to work on. And then there's a problem that we have to kick down the road, a can that we have to kick down the road if we persist. And so we chose Python 2 at that point because we didn't know if we would have a company in 6 years' time, right? But it meant that at that point we could get out a product much faster and a much more stable product than if we'd gone the Python 3 route. And it turns out that the product did have sticking power. So later on, we had to spend significant time porting to Python 3. But I don't know that we would have got there if we had picked Python 3 from the get-go. And for those of you who had experienced it, the 2 to 3 tool really only covers the tip of the iceberg for porting work in large code bases. Legacy code, rather, in some sense, is a privilege. To get to the point where you have legacy code, you've had to last. Most startups die within 10 years. To me, legacy code is a badge of honor that says not dead yet. All right? And so if you have legacy code, wear it with pride, but also make a plan for how to deal with it. You can't carry it on forever. It poses interesting technical challenges to your senior technical folk. It might be a thing that, I know it doesn't seem like it, but it can if you frame it in the right way. Another view for me that's changed over the years is how we think about communication between our customers and our engineering team. And oftentimes people go, what do you mean your engineers communicate with customers? Like, what's going on there? And there's this trope of software engineers who get locked in basements, right? And you sort of slip them the nourishment pizza under the door and like the code comes out. And I've come to detest it, right? For us as a long-term team, the idea that we build a product and we never meet the people who use our code, it just sucks, right? We want to know who uses our stuff. And so for us, it's incredibly disempowering that you work on something for so long and you don't meet the customers. You can't expect your team to want to delight people that they just never speak to, right? That's not a thing that we've had success with. Our engineers do speak to customers, and in several different ways. They might be on an escalated support rotation, or we have events like this, which is a developer event, or we might be at, even at sales events, we'll take our engineers with as well. So multiple times a year, all around the world. And so at the back there are Louis and Heather, and Francois is outside, and they are all members of our engineering team. There are no sales folks here. And then even when we go to big sales events, RSA, Black Hat, and the others, we will take engineers with. And you know, when you speak to people and it's an engineer doing the demo, there's sort of two-way feedback there. The engineer is speaking to people and seeing their reaction to the thing that they've built, which is very empowering. And the person seeing the demo goes, I have a question. And they go, yeah, this is the answer because I built the feature. Like, I don't have to go check this with anybody else. I built this thing, which is unusual in those venues. There is something else I've shifted my view on, which is that process matters. And early on, we really didn't think too much about process. We were really just trying to ship code and very much concentrated on the technology. But over time, I've come to hack personally on our processes more than the technology, because process carries us when people join or leave. It guides us through technical decisions, and it forces us to think about second order, third order, and more effects of a change. It seemed like a waste of time, process that is, when we were running helter-skelter trying to get through our early versions. But now without process, there's no chance that we can keep our teams aligned. The final thing I'll say about process is that it has to be malleable. You have to be able to change it. Because if you have some sort of fixed, regimented process that never changes or doesn't adapt, then it's going to lead to ossification and frustration. So internally, we say that our process is to fix the process. If a current process isn't optimal, then change it. And basically everybody in the team is able to change a process. Like if you can identify a flaw in the process, you tell us how to fix it, and then we adopt that new one. And that leads directly to another view that I've shifted on, which is being an efficiency maximalist. As technologists, we're trained to prize efficiency, right? And hate wastefulness, especially on the resource side. It literally shows up in the way that we hire. You know, we measure the performance of some algorithm that a candidate sends us in a hiring call. And so like, they go, like NQ, terrible performance, right? Normally you'd say that. Now, we might think things are unnecessary, or meetings are inefficient and unnecessary, or there's a solution is pointless if it can't solve every last aspect of my problem, or customer calls with engineers are expensive time. You know, those engineers could be spending their time elsewhere. But I've come to appreciate inefficiency for the positive aspects that don't get as much positive attention. anyone here a listener of 99% Invisible? Right. So you may have heard this discussion that he had, but it really resonated with me. Roman Mars, he's the host of 99PI. He frames it really well in my view. And he says, quote, "The march to make things more and more efficient makes the world a worse place," end quote. And he's got a whole discussion. I don't fully agree with all of his aspects, but I think I like the way that he frames this. He points out that if you make things as efficient as possible, it can lead to very bad outcomes. He highlights that the most efficient restaurant that you can go to has no room for patrons. It has a kitchen, and it has a kitchen, and you just simply ship the food from there to the customers, right? And in that line, your customers are just never experiencing an actual restaurant. That sucks. So you need to be tolerant of inefficiency to allow the space for creativity, for joy, and for playfulness. Short-term building can prioritize efficiency in terms of the team's time. But if you're working on, that's if you're working on features, or if you're not working on features rather, then you're wasting time. But in long-term building, making space for creativity, playfulness is very important. To be sure, when I say we're tolerant of inefficiency, I don't mean pointless meetings or digging proverbial holes just to fill them in again. I'll give you an example. Recently, we celebrated our 10-year birthday, and as part of this, our front-end team built a Pac-Man game clone. And part of this thing is you've like the little hacker running around, eating files, and some of those files are canaries, which slow you down, and it means that the little robots might catch up to you. But we had 4 people actually spend 3 weeks building this. It's a game. We gave it to our customers, they played it, kind of life went on. But we are happy to do this sort of thing because it stretches that front-end team. They bring a little bit of whimsy into the world. They have some fun. And this is key to us. Like, we have the space to be inefficient to keep the team satisfied. Now, I've spoken about lessons we've learned over the past 10 years. And there are also lessons we've relearned multiple times. Sometimes it's the same lesson, but sometimes it's just a recurrence, which is a rhyming thing. Hopefully, some of these lessons will stick. The first one here is that for startups or technical startups, you are going to get sales wrong. You're going to hope that you find a sales partner that will do the selling for you, but actually they are not going to sell for you. There's more to say here. Jeffrey Moore talks about it in Crossing the Chasm. You are probably going to repeat the same mistake. Partners will not sell for you until you don't need them to sell for you. We've had several products that we've tried before Canary, and even through Canary, we've learned that friction hurts customers. It might be extra UI bits, extra copy, janky Bluetooth. All of those things are going to slow customers down. And so you have to worry about friction. Friction is hell. It hurts your customers. We've seen that time and time again. Code rewrites regularly deliver the same lesson for us because we hit them frequently. You rewrite some code, but it's an option of last resort because working code trumps conjectured code. We've often entered rewrites of complex code and spent a lot more time than we expected on it. Now, you're almost guaranteed to need to learn this yourself in our experience. We've never actually been able to pass on the lesson verbally. And then without getting too lost in the clouds, the final lesson we see regularly rhyming is that better communication leads to better solutions, and poor communication usually has poor outcomes. That's kind of trite. I'm going to quickly say that I'm going to adapt Benjamin Franklin here and say an ounce of clarification is worth a pound of code. All right, so let's wrap this thing up. We're approaching the end. Mel Conway said that the communication structure of an organization is reflected in the systems they design. I'm saying a company's founding intent will reflect in the values and the products that it builds. A company founded with an exit already planned will prioritize short-term thinking. One that prioritizes short-term decisions is one that seeks the shortest path to that exit. If you're looking for the shortest path, you're going to choose efficiency to that exit, and those paths not taken remain unexplored. I'm not disparaging short-term building. I'm just saying that there is an alternative here. So there's a joy to crafting stuff long-term. You can see your customers grow while not giving up on delighting them. We followed this long path. We've learned lessons along the way. We've been at it enough to see rhyming lessons and sometimes even repeating those lessons. I switched my view on previously held ideas and demonstrated that old dogs sometimes learn new tricks. And I'm still having fun. There never is enough time. Thank you for yours. There is no time for questions, but...
Thank you so much, Marco. That was fantastic.